Hello, I'm Greg, and this is episode 8 in my series on how to recreate Defender in Unity. If you've ever wanted to learn how to write a video game from scratch, then grab your favorite beverage, pull up a chair, and follow along as I teach you how to write Defender in Unity. The first thing I want to do is I want to fix up my sprites. If you've been following this tutorial series, you may have noticed, if you look at these sprites, they're fairly transparent. In fact, they're very, very transparent. And the reason for that is when I brought them in, and I said I wanted the alpha as transparency, I changed it from input texture alpha to from grayscale. And the reason I did that is because there's no alpha on these. They're black background, so they're not transparent at all. You can see here he's got this black outline around him. So in order to get the transparency, I tried to get around it by switching it to from grayscale. Unfortunately, that had the unfortunate side effect of making these guys very transparent. So to fix that, we're going to show this in Explorer, and I'm going to open this up in Photoshop. So I'll say open with Adobe Photoshop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit these sprites, and I'm going to remove the background and make them transparent. And then I'm going to change that back to the way it's supposed to be, so we'll have true transparency. And for some reason, if I just try and remove the background, it wants to just set the background color, and it's not transparent. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to copy this whole thing, and I'm going to paste it. And then I'm going to go to this one, and I'm just going to turn it off so there's no background. And we'll come back to this one, and I will use the magic wand and select that. And now that actually gets rid of the background and makes it truly transparent. So let's zoom in and fix these areas where it didn't clear it out. There might be a faster way to do this, like I could just replace all the black, but I am not a Photoshop guru by any stretch of the imagination, so you're just going to have to bear with me while I go about it this way. Oops. I'm going to make sure I select the right pixels. And I will fast forward through the rest of this so you don't have to watch me tediously fix this. And I'm not worried about these. I'm not going to be using these, but I probably will use the 250 and 500 when we display points that get displayed on the screen. So now I'm going to export this. Quick export as a PNG. And I'm going to put it right into my art folder here. And it's going to be defendersprites.png. And I'll go ahead and exit out of Photoshop. And now, if we look in our art folder here, we have two Defender sprites. This one can correctly come in with input texture alpha. I do want to change the pixels per unit to be 75. And we want this to be multiple. I will apply that. And I will open up our sprite editor and say slice, automatic slice, and we get all our individual sprites here. I will apply that and close out. Now if we look at these sprites, look how much better they look. Night and day difference. So I'm going to delete the old one, and that's going to mess up all of our images in our game. So we're going to have to go in and fix them all. So let's start, go into our prefabs folder, and we'll start with our mobs, and we'll go to the human, and right here you see missing sprite. So what I'll do is I will scroll down until we find the human. This is the guy we want right here. So that's the human, and now we go back and look at the lander. First of all, I need to pick the 2 sprites I'm going to use for my lander. Now, I realized before that I was actually using the wrong images. I was using these. For the lander, I want to use these 2 until they pick up a human. If they ever make it to the top of the screen with a human, then they will turn into a fast mutant, which is a different icon. But I'm going to start with this one and this one for those 2 sprites. And then down here, I'm just going to pick the first one. And there we go. So now the lander is fixed. Nice. We want to fix the player ship. So we'll go to the top of the prefabs folder, pick the player ship. Scroll down and we'll pick, I think we're going to pick this one. And then he's going to have a couple of sprites here. So I'll pick that one and that one. Okay, and then if we go, we've already picked the one up here, I believe, so I think we're good there. Do we have any other sprites that we need to worry about here? The blip. This one, I'm actually going to use a player ship sprite for that. But this should be on the overview map. Okay, so that fixes that. I know there's some things in the UI I'm going to need to fix up. For instance, we have our smart bombs and we have our, what do you call them? Player life icons. We're going to want to change them. So let's go into scenes, main. Yeah, so you can see they're all messed up. So let's go into our UI here. We go into our scoreboard, canvas, lives. So yeah, these guys are all messed up. So scroll down and see what we got here. Very nice. Okay, and then for smart bombs, I think I can just pick all 3 of these actually, and I'll come down here. And there we go. So now we got our smart bombs and we got our player life. Look how much nicer these sprites look. Very, very nice. So we'll give this a real quick test. Hit play. Oh, look how much better those sprites look. Oh yeah, that's so much nicer. Okay, great improvement. So now I want to do a little bit of level building. We're going to go in here under our mobs, and I'm going to create an empty game object here, and I'm going to call it humans. And I'm going to drag our human in there. And I want to duplicate him. I think I want to start out, I'm thinking the first level should have 10 humans on it. So what we're going to do is we are going to switch to our scene view here. And we're just going to start moving these guys around. Try and build out our level a little bit. So I think I want to put one kind of way over to the edge here. Put another one a little bit lower than him maybe. Let's put a couple up closer to the surface over here. And eventually these guys are going to be walking around on the surface too. Somewhere over there. Let's move this guy up a little bit. Maybe move this guy to the right and maybe up just a tad. This guy over about here. Maybe up a little bit. And then this guy can go almost all the way to the right. maybe up really close to the surface. All right, so if we were to give that a test play, and just fly through the scene. Let's just see what that looks like with those humans across the surface. That looks pretty good. Of course, our landers need to have some work done. And the landers, I actually want to have them appear in waves. So we're going to have a mob spawner, and we want to have multiple waves that spawn throughout the round. So up here under mobs, I'm going to create an empty game object, and I'm going to call this wave 1, and then I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to call that wave 2, and I'm going to move these to the top of this guy here, and I'm actually going to move these landers into wave 1, and these into wave 2, and then I'm going to duplicate him a couple of times. And I'm going to want to create some scripts. We want to have a mob manager, and then we're going to want to have under each wave a wave manager. So let's go into our scripts and set them up. So under managers, I'm going to shrink this down. Let's create a script, and we will call this mob manager. And then let's create another script, and I'm going to call that wave manager. Now that's interesting. It went away, so I'm not sure what that was. Okay, I'm going to take the mob manager and I'm going to drop it here on this mobs object. And then each of our waves is going to have a wave manager. Okay, so let's first look at our mob manager script. And if you weren't watching the earlier videos, you don't know that I have edited my script template to get rid of all the boilerplate code, all the extra using statements and the start and update method that it normally creates when you create a new mono behavior script. It just saves me the time of going in and deleting it every time I create a script. So what do we want to put in our mob manager? So let's start with our serialized fields. First of all, I want to create a wave manager. Actually, I want an array of wave managers. And I also want to have a transform that's going to be our humans container. Okay, and we're going to want to have our game manager. And I want to have a list of game objects that's going to contain our humans. I'm going to hit Control period. And it added this using system collections generic for me. Okay, now I want to add a couple of public fields here. I want an integer that's going to be the remaining humans. And that will be an expression body method that just returns the number of humans. And we're going to want to have one remaining enemies, which is going to be the sum of the remaining enemies in our wave. Now that doesn't exist yet, so I'm actually going to comment this out for now, but we're going to create that at some point. This is going to be used so we know how many enemies are left, so we can know when we've cleared the level. Okay, in our start method, I am going to cache our game manager. Actually, I really should make that a singleton. And I don't know if I've created this yet. we're going to have an event on our game manager that will tell us when an entity has been destroyed. We'll go ahead and create a property for now. That's actually going to be an event. So down here where we have these events, let me just move this down. I'm going to say public event action game object entity destroyed. And we're going to have a method on this that when we destroy a enemy ship, it will call a method that will fire this event to let any subscribers know that they care that an entity has been destroyed. But for now, in our mob manager, it's enough that we have that subscription, and we're going to create the method to handle that. And what else do we want to do on our start method here? We want to instantiate our humans collection. And then we want to populate it. So we're going to say for each transform human in our humans container, we will say humans.add human.gameObject. And then just to make sure that everything's working, we're going to add a debug.log. And we're going to say mob manager found some number of humans. And now what do we want to do on our onEntityDestroyed? One thing I want to do is if a human is destroyed, I want to say if humans contains game object, or if it doesn't, I just want to return. Otherwise, I want to say humans remove entity. So I want to remove that human from our collection. And now we're going to do a debug.log. So now if we destroy a human, we'll be notified, and I can say that we removed it and how many remain. I think that's probably good for here for now. Let's work on our wave manager. Go back into Unity. Make sure everything compiles. And that looks good. Let's go into our wave manager. Zoom in. Okay, so we will once again start with our serialized field. We are going to want a float, which is going to be the delay before we actually spawn this wave. We'll default that to 0 so it will spawn them instantly. We want to have a game manager and a list of game objects for our enemies. And it adds the system collections generic namespace. Okay, so once again, we want to have a public integer remaining enemies enemies.count. So we can go back into our mob manager and uncomment that. So this is basically a link query. Hence, it brought in system.link. Let me get rid of these unneeded things. It's basically going to sum up the remaining enemies for all the enemies within this wave, within all of our waves, actually. So this is kind of a nice shorthand way of looping through all of our waves, looking at all the, well, basically getting the remaining enemies from that wave. Nice shorthand little link statement. So we want to have a start method, but this time we want to make it a coroutine. So I'm going to say IEnumerator start. Now, IEnumerator, this is the wrong one. We want iCollections, or system collections. So this is the IEnumerator that we want. And it's complaining because we don't have a return statement. return statement is missing because this is a IEnumerator. It expects us to have a return, and we will later. But first of all, we want to get our game manager. So once again, find object of type game manager, and we want to subscribe to the entity destroyed event on entity destroyed. Actually, I don't want the parentheses. And let's go ahead and generate that method and delete that. All right, we're going to want to instantiate our collection of enemies. And let's populate it. So we're going to get the transform, our children transforms. So this is a nice built-in feature in Unity where you can just iterate through your children with a for each loop. And it'll give me all of our child transforms. Okay, so for each enemy and transform, enemies.add enemy.gameObject. All right, so we have populated that. Now we're going to do a yield return, and we want to wait for seconds. Now, I actually want to cache this. Well, I don't need to do that. I'm only going to call this once. Well, it's going to be called, yeah. I could add a helper method. I'm just concerned about creating garbage on the heap, but this is not going to be called that often. So we're just going to say yield return new wait for seconds wave delay. So we're going to do a yield return, and then we're going to want to have some sound effects for when we actually beam in our enemies. So I'm going to put a little comment here, play beam in sound effect. And by the way, we're going to create a nice cool particle system too. It's going to be kind of like a reverse explosion where the particles kind of start out and they just sort of converge into a center point as the enemies are materializing. I think it's going to look pretty cool. I'm going to try and get as close as possible to what the original game did. Now we want to loot through all of our enemies in our enemies collection, and we want to instantiate. I'm going to have to add a comment for this. Instantiate beam and particle effect. In fact, I'm going to comment this whole thing. All that's coming up. Then I want to delay for a second before I actually enable our enemies, because I want to give that animation a chance to play. Then we're going to loop through each of our enemies. And enable them. Which means we want them to be disabled initially. Now in our on entity destroyed, we're going to do like we did in our humans. We're going to say if enemies dot contains entity. So let's change this to entity. Then we're going to debug log removing, I'm going to say name, removing entity.name from enemies. And we'll say enemies.remove entity. Okay. And I can actually invert this if statement and do an early return. Okay, so I want to take a look at our destructible. So when an object is destroyed, we're telling the game manager that we were destroyed. So I think that would be a good point right here to say entity destroyed, invoke component. So that way any subscribers to that event can handle that component being destroyed. Let's go back into Unity. And let's start building out our lander waves a little bit. And let's see, let's take the first 5 here. And let's just kind of arrange them a little bit in our scene. Put that one there. And maybe move this one over here. That one's probably fine. I want to move these over more to this area. So they'll be starting to the right of the player ship a little bit. And then we're going to disable all these guys. Now let's take a look at the other ones. We're going to want to put them mostly on the other side. So that one should be fine. Where's this guy at? Whoa, he's way over there off the screen. Don't want him over there. So let's kind of bring him over here. Bring him in here. Okay, I think that should be pretty good. Now we'll disable these guys. And let's just give this a test and just see if our waves materialize. We should get 5 right away over here. And then, actually, we want to set our wave delay on these guys. I want this one to be about 15 seconds. And I think I want the first one to be 2 seconds. So let's go ahead and hit play. And we get an error. Oh, I forgot to assign. If we look at our mob manager, it wants a humans container. So let's drag that in there and hit play again. And in 2 seconds, we should get some mobs. And there we go. There should be 5. All right. And then we should get 5 more. So it looks like that worked, although they don't look like they're placed quite where I was expecting them to be. But at least the waves were definitely bringing them in at the appropriate times. Okay, so let's see about getting our beam-in sound working. Let's look at our resources folder here, persistent components. We got our sound manager. Let's open up that sound manager script. And we're going to want to do some refactoring of this guy. So the first thing I want to do is I want to add some serialized fields for audio clips. And I want to put our fire sound in here, our start sound, and our beam-in sound. And then I'm going to add some public expression body method properties to return those. Okay, and then we've got this public method already to play an audio clip. So I think that's good to go there. So let's jump back into Unity, take a look at our sound manager, and we should see some new fields appear here. So we've got fire sound, start sound, and beam-in sound. So let's go into our sounds folder. And what are we going to want to use for those? I believe we're using Light Blast 5 for our fire sound. Our start sound, I was using Defender Start. And for our beam-in sound, we're going to use this Defender Materialize. Oh, Go pick our sound manager again, Defender Materialize. Okay, now let's go into our game manager. Open up that script. And where we play the start sound currently, right here, instead of having the start sound come from here, we're just going to remove this serialized field, and I am going to use the sound manager.instance start sound. We'll just keep all our sounds in one place. Now the guns fire a sound, so let's go find that. Prefab, weapons, gun. So we're going to be able to remove this, and we will say sound manager.instance.fire sound. So we can remove that. All right, so now in the wave manager, where we spawn in, we can say sound manager.instance.play audio clip sound manager.instance.beamIn sound. So now when our mobs spawn in, they'll play that beamIn sound. So let's go back into Unity, and we will hit play and give this a test. And there they go. And then in 15 seconds, the other 5 should spawn in. And there they are. Nice. So we want to add a particle effect when the ships beam in. And I've actually created one already. And rather than have you watch me do this, I'm just going to import it. So I'm going to go to Assets, Import Custom Package, and I called it beamIn. So I will import that. And if we go in our Prefabs Effects folder, you can see it's right here. If I drag it into the scene, you can see what it looks like there. And so that's going to be displayed when we materialize our enemy landers. So up here under Managers, I'm going to create a new empty game object. I'm going to call this Effects Manager. And I guess I'll go ahead and create a prefab for that. And in our Scripts Managers folder, I will right-click, Create C# Script, Effects Manager. Let Unity compile that. And we are going to add that script to our game component here, and I'm going to override to apply that to the prefab. And let's open this up in the editor and take a look at it. We're going to make this a singleton, so we will say public static effects manager instance with a public getter and a private setter. And in our await method, we will say if instance is not equal to null and instance is not equal to this, then we will destroy the game object and return. Otherwise, we will set instance equal to this. There's our singleton pattern. We're going to want some serialized fields. They will be game objects. We will have an explosion prefab and a beamIn prefab. And like we did with our sound manager, we're going to have some public expression body methods to return those. So explosion prefab will return the explosion prefab, and the beamIn prefab will return the beamIn prefab. All right. So if we go back to our wave manager, right here is where we're going to take advantage of that thing, and we're actually going to instantiate those effects. So all we're going to do is say instantiate And why did that not like that? Instantiate our effects manager dot instance dot beamIn prefab. We want to instantiate it at our enemies. I'm going to put these on separate lines here. At our enemies transform position, and we'll just use quaternion identity for the rotation. All right. So that should give us all the code that we need to do that. Now we need to assign these in the inspector. So we'll go up into Unity, let Unity recompile those scripts, and we'll go into our effects prefabs here, and we want our explosion prefab and our beamIn prefab. Now we're already displaying explosions, but we're not getting the prefab from here, obviously. Our destructible script is doing this. So let's go look at our scripts, destructible. And you can see here we've got this explosion prefab here. And all we're going to do is tell it to use the effects manager dot instance explosion prefab. And that should handle that. Let's go back into Unity, and we'll give this a quick test. When our landers spawn, they should beam in with the cool particle effect and sound effect, and then when we blow them up, the explosion should still work. Nice. And our explosions work. Okay, and if I fly into them, boom, I die. Very nice. I think that's going to do it for this video. I hope you found that useful. And if you did, do me a favor, click that like and subscribe button. It really does help me to grow my channel and help the YouTube algorithm to show this to as many people as possible. And if you have any questions about anything I covered, leave a comment below, or if you have any suggestions also, I'd love to hear those. And if you have detailed questions, if you're stuck or something, check out my Discord server. I'll put a link in the description. You can ask more detailed questions there, and you can even paste in some screenshots or code snippets of things you're having trouble with, and I can give a more detailed response there than I can in a YouTube comment. And finally, I will put a link in the description for the beamIn particle system that I used in this project. So if you're following along, you can just import that as well. So thanks so much for watching, and good luck on your game development journey.